a pale fog drapes itself over the early morning sea. From the shore, the water stretches like a sheet of glass, the horizon hidden behind a curtain of drifting mist. Gulls wheel slowly overhead, their wings catching the light of a sun not yet fully risen. The only sounds are the gentle rush of waves against pebbled sand and the faint creak of wood from the docks nearby. Ropes shift softly, sails rustle, and a briny scent rises with the breeze. In the stillness of dawn, ships stir in the harbor. Their tall masts reach skyward like the trunks of trees in a floating forest. Their hulls sit steady, waiting for wind, for orders, for the quiet call to begin. Men move carefully aboard, some checking the lines, others pausing at the edge of the deck to gaze out into the haze. Beneath the surface, the sea murmurs with unseen currents, as if carrying old stories along with the tide. It was a time when the oceans held great significance. Monarchs dreamed of distant coasts, of gold-laced maps and star-guided passages. The sea was a path, a protector, and sometimes a patient adversary. In the 16th century, England and Spain stood as two great powers at the edge of these waters, each guided by sovereigns with strong visions, each drawn forward by a desire to shape the world beyond their shores. This is the setting into which our journey gently drifts tonight. A voyage shaped by planning and ambition, but carried on winds that belonged only to the earth and sky. The story of the Spanish Armada is often told in bold terms, in cannon fire and gallant declarations. But beneath those louder moments lies a softer, more enduring tale. One of ships floating through fog, of stars watched from wooden decks, of hopes held like lanterns swaying in the dark. Welcome to Sleepy Journeys, the podcast designed to lull you into a peaceful slumber with soothing stories through time, places, and ideas. Whether you're winding down after a long day or simply looking for a peaceful escape, you're in the right place. My name's Jack, and I'm so happy to have you here with me. Each night on Sleepy Journeys, we set off together on gentle adventures designed to soothe your mind and ease you into rest. You'll find journeys through history, comforting fairy tales, myths and folklore, the wonders of science, fascinating inventions, inspiring famous figures, music history, and even calm explorations around the world. No matter where your curiosity takes you, there's a dreamy, Sleepy Journeys show for you. Tonight, we're going to embark on a gentle journey through sails in the mist, the Spanish Armada. And just before we fully drift off, if you're enjoying Sleepy Journeys, go ahead and tap follow or subscribe on whatever platform you're joining me on. That way, you won't miss any of our upcoming sleepy adventures. And let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us. Now, take a deep breath and let's begin. Far beyond the misty coasts of England, another land basked in golden sunlight. Spain, in the late 16th century, stretched like a tapestry of stone cities, olive groves, and richly adorned churches. Its monarch, King Philip II, presided over a realm that reached across oceans and continents. From the silver mines of the Americas to the quiet monasteries of Castile, his empire moved with steady confidence, like the tides that touched its many shores. Philip's vision was clear and enduring. He believed in order, in faith, and in the careful stewardship of a kingdom blessed with abundance. His court in Madrid was one of precision. Paper rustled beneath the hands of scribes, footsteps echoed in marble corridors, and the measured tones of counsel echoed gently within vaulted halls. Spain's wealth, drawn in part from the treasures of its New World colonies, helped build a fleet unmatched in grandeur. Galleons, broad and slow like floating fortresses, were crafted with care in busy shipyards where sawdust mingled with the scent of pine and salt air. Yet, even with its vast holdings, Spain looked north with concern. Across the Channel, England was awakening. Under Queen Elizabeth I, the island kingdom had begun to chart its own path, calmly, steadily, and with a sense of quiet purpose. The Queen, poised and thoughtful, cultivated a court of learning and expression, while quietly encouraging a growing naval presence that reached outward with curiosity and care. Though the two monarchs had once considered marriage, their paths diverged. Philip remained deeply rooted in the traditions of Catholic Spain, while Elizabeth guided her people along a Protestant course. It was a difference marked by distance, a slow, unfolding divergence of identity. Still, the seas between them stirred. Spanish ships met English privateers in distant waters. Words of protest traveled in scrolls and sealed letters. Alliances formed like clouds on the horizon, soft at first, then gradually more defined. Spain watched England's ventures with measured eyes. England watched Spain's might with equal caution. Their ambitions grew in tandem, though shaped by different dreams. Spain's golden age moved with the rhythm of cathedral bells and sails on the horizon. In the royal harbors of Cadiz and Seville, ships departed regularly, carrying goods, treasure, and faith to distant lands. On the docks, crates were loaded with care, filled with olives, almonds, wool, and silver coins stamped with the king's seal. Fishermen untangled their nets in the shadows of larger vessels, while merchants moved among barrels, inspecting the contents with quiet efficiency. Philip's Spain was governed by structure. His advisors worked in orderly rows, their voices rarely raised, their faces lit by candles and the pale light of southern skies. From his palace, Philip kept careful watch over every dispatch. Though solemn and reserved, he was tireless in his dedication, writing notes in the margins of reports, ensuring his fleets were tended to with precision. Faith was a cornerstone of this empire. Monasteries hummed with chant, and processions moved slowly through city streets, casting long shadows at dusk. The Spanish Inquisition, though stern in reputation, existed within a culture that revered tradition and continuity. For Philip, defending the faith was as vital as defending the crown. The sea was both a servant and a silent mirror. Spanish galleons glided through calm Atlantic waters, their sails catching wind like wings. They moved slowly, steadily, bearing gold, hope, and the weight of a great nation's ambition. And in every voyage, there was purpose: to spread order, to preserve faith, to ensure that Spain's name would endure like the distant toll of a church bell at sea. Across the Channel, Queen Elizabeth moved through her court with grace and discernment. Her England was smaller in reach, yet rich in spirit. The Queen, clad in silks and pearls, listened carefully to advisors, wrote poems by candlelight, and walked in garden paths lined with lavender and rosemary. Her voice, though rarely raised, carried weight. Her decisions echoed with clarity. In London, the streets buzzed with life. The Thames bore ships from distant shores, and markets hummed with both local and exotic goods. Elizabeth's reign brought a gentle rise in exploration. Sailors like Drake and Hawkins began to navigate the outer edges of the known world, their journeys marked by parchment charts and the stars above. England's navy was smaller than Spain's, but nimble and bold. Ships were crafted in quiet shipyards along the southern coast, their hulls shaped by seasoned hands. Cannons were fitted, sails woven, and compasses calibrated. These vessels were not massive, but they were swift and keenly designed, able to turn quickly, to slip through channels, to harness the coastal breezes of home. Religion, too, had its place in Elizabeth's rule. Protestant reforms settled across the land. The Book of Common Prayer echoed softly in churches. Sermons were read from carved pulpits. The faith of the people turned gently toward a new direction, steady and assured. Elizabeth's England looked to the future with thoughtful determination. While Spain guarded its empire with solemn resolve, England explored with quiet curiosity. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, their currents moved closer, two great powers borne forward by sea and circumstance, each guided by its own vision, each watching the other from afar. Along the coastlines of Spain, the air carried the rhythmic sounds of preparation. In harbors both grand and modest, ships stood nestled together, their wooden sides gently brushing against the docks. The water below them shifted with a low and constant murmur, like a breath drawn in and slowly exhaled. Above, gulls circled lazily, dipping and rising on invisible currents. It was a scene shaped by the quiet momentum of readiness. In the shipyards of Lisbon, Seville, and Cadiz, craftsmen moved with patient intent. They bent over timbers, measuring, cutting, shaping. The scent of pine mingled with tar and brine. Hammers fell in a rhythm that echoed across the waterfront, soft and steady, like a lullaby in wood and iron. Masts were raised, sails prepared, and hulls sealed with pitch that steamed gently in the morning light. The Armada, this fleet of many vessels, was being assembled with care. It was a task both vast and intimate, requiring not only grand vision, but the hands and hearts of countless workers. Carts brought supplies along cobbled roads, salted meats, barrels of wine, dried legumes, biscuits, and bundles of sailcloth. In warehouses, scribes marked lists and checked inventories beneath the flicker of oil lamps. The work continued from sunrise into the twilight hours. Sailors began to gather from all corners of Spain and beyond. They arrived with belongings tucked into cloth bundles, with stories shared in the quiet moments between shifts. In taverns near the water, songs rose and fell in the evenings, melodies carried on the breeze, mingling with the creak of ships and the soft slap of waves against stone. And amid it all, the planners moved quietly. Officers and captains met in shaded rooms, their voices low, their charts spread wide. They spoke of weather and timing, of routes and rendezvous. The Armada was not merely a fleet of ships. It was a weaving of purpose and preparation, guided by tides and tempered by patience. The construction of the Armada's ships was a feat of rhythm and resolve. In the dusty shipyards, the day began early. Carpenters moved along scaffolding, their hands coated with sawdust and resin. Each plank was chosen with care, each nail hammered with purpose. The ships were built to endure long distances and unpredictable waters, their bellies wide to carry supplies, and their decks sturdy beneath the weight of cannon and crew. Cannons themselves were prepared in foundries further inland, where furnaces glowed and the clang of iron rang out into the dawn. Craftsmen poured molten metal into molds, then cooled and polished each barrel until it shone. These weapons, though destined for battle, sat still and silent, stacked like sleeping giants, awaiting their place aboard the vessels. Below decks, shipbuilders constructed storerooms, hammocks, and narrow corridors lit by slits in the wood. The space was cramped but ordered, each item tied down, each crate labeled. Above, sailors practiced the raising of sails, the coiling of ropes, and the steady work of steering. The tasks were repeated again and again, with careful familiarity. Every piece had its place. Every man had his role. The Armada was growing, as a slow-moving city of wood and canvas, brought to life by thousands of small, deliberate acts. In the harbors, a softer side of preparation unfolded. Families gathered at the edge of the water to see off brothers, sons, and fathers. Farewells were not loud or tearful, but quiet and enduring. Embraces held a moment longer, eyes lingering as boats pulled away. Children waved from behind skirts. Fishermen paused their work to offer nods of respect. Along the piers, the ships bobbed gently, their names painted in neat letters on their bows. Some were galleons with tall masts and rows of gun ports. Others were smaller vessels, fast and maneuverable, each fitted for its own purpose. Sailors loaded barrels of water and salted fish, coils of rope, and bundles of navigational instruments. The breeze moved among the sails, flapping them like flags of anticipation. In the evenings, the ports were awash with lamplight. Shadows stretched across the cobblestones, and the clink of tankards echoed from tavern doors. Laughter rose in spurts, followed by quiet conversation. There was pride, and there was hope. For many, this voyage was more than duty. It was destiny, a chance to be part of something grand, to follow orders written in elegant hand and sealed with wax. At dawn, the sound of bells stirred the town. Sailors made their way back to their ships. The tide, ever faithful, rolled in, lifting the vessels inch by inch. And slowly, day by day, the Armada prepared to meet the sea. The sea, like a great shifting blanket, stretched out before the Armada as it began its northward journey. From the ports of Spain, the ships drifted into deeper waters, their sails filled with a steady wind that whispered of far-off lands. The sun rose slowly behind them, casting a golden glow over the masts and rigging. Below, the ocean glistened like hammered silver, its surface broken only by the gentle wakes of the fleet as it moved as one. The Armada sailed with patience, each vessel holding its place in the great formation. Larger ships flanked the outer edges. Smaller ones nestled near the center, like birds tucked into a soft nest. The creak of timber and the rhythmic flap of sails became the soundtrack of the voyage. Above, the sky changed color hour by hour, from the pale hues of morning to the rich blue of noon, and then to the warm pastels of twilight. Life aboard ship was a quiet pattern of repetition and care. Sailors climbed rigging with practiced grace, tending to lines and adjusting sails. Officers stood near the helm, their hands resting on polished rails, eyes scanning the horizon. Meals were taken in turns. Simple fare passed in wooden bowls, salted meat, dry bread, and sips of wine or water poured from barrels. Between duties, men leaned on railings and watched the endless water pass beneath them, their thoughts adrift with the tide. Nights at sea brought their own kind of magic. Stars emerged one by one in the velvet sky, constellations familiar to seasoned navigators who traced them with pointing fingers and soft-spoken names. The moon cast a gentle sheen over the decks, lighting the sails in pale silver. Lanterns swung softly from beams, their glow steady and warm, casting long shadows that danced with the motion of the ship. The journey northward unfolded like a slow breath, each mile another heartbeat in the voyage. The Armada moved onward, its ships silent, its crew steady, and the sea around it holding its secrets in the hush of salt and mist. Leaving the safety of the Iberian coastline, the fleet passed through the Strait of Gibraltar, where the sea narrowed and the land on either side seemed to lean in like old sentinels. Cliffs stood tall, their bases lapped by foam. The wind funneled gently between the landforms, catching sails with soft insistence. The ships moved in procession, their flags lifting lazily with the breeze, each hull carving a gentle line in the water behind it. From above, the straits looked like a ribbon, threading the ships from one vast sea to another. The Atlantic opened up to them, calm and shimmering, its depths layered with mystery. Dolphins appeared now and then, gliding alongside the vessels in playful arcs, their sleek bodies slicing through the waves before vanishing below. The sailors, though focused, were not hurried. Tasks were completed with care, ropes coiled neatly, decks scrubbed in silence as morning turned to afternoon. Voices were low, often limited to necessity. Much of the time, there was only the wind, the sea, and the distant creak of another ship within sight. Crossing the straits marked a change in atmosphere. The coast faded slowly behind them, and the open sea welcomed them forward. The Armada began to stretch slightly, ships finding their rhythm on a broader canvas. It was here that the voyage began to feel truly underway. As night fell, the sea transformed. Moonlight blanketed the water, smoothing out the ripples until it appeared almost still. The wind slowed to a soft murmur, just enough to keep the sails full. Lanterns hung along the rails, their light catching bits of dew that formed in corners and crevices. Beneath the surface, unseen currents guided the Armada northward. Navigators consulted their tools, cross-staffs, compasses, and maps marked with ink and care. They made notes under starlight, using their fingers to measure the angle of Polaris, gauging distance and direction with quiet confidence. The sailors slept in shifts, wrapped in coarse blankets, their breathing blending with the hum of the ocean. Those awake moved with care, checking rigging, securing equipment, and keeping watch for changes in weather or position. Now and then, a distant ship's lantern would wink from across the dark sea, a comforting signal that the fleet remained whole. On deck, the silence was near complete. Footsteps were muffled on wooden boards. The occasional creak of a rope or groan of timber was swallowed by the night. Above, stars shifted slowly, and the moon sailed her own path across the sky. This was the Armada in motion, in harmony with the sea. Each ship a world unto itself, moving with purpose, held together by wind, tide, and the quiet certainty that the voyage would continue at dawn. Morning broke with a haze over the English Channel, the water pale and dappled beneath a sky still streaked with cloud. The Spanish Armada, now approaching the southern coast of England, moved in a crescent formation, graceful and quiet. The ships had journeyed far, their sails marked by sea salt and sunlight, their decks smoothed by constant footsteps and sea wind. As the fleet drew near, the English coast seemed to drift into view like a memory, chalk cliffs rising gently above green hills, the land steady and watchful. Within sheltered harbors, English ships stirred to life. Word had traveled ahead, carried on swift winds and silent messengers. Queen Elizabeth's navy, though smaller in size, had waited with calm intention. Harbors emptied, sails unfurled, and the waters began to ripple with a new rhythm. What followed was not a sudden clash, but a long, drifting encounter, ships circling at a distance, maneuvering through mist and tide. The Armada sailed in disciplined order, the English fleet weaving around them with lighter, faster vessels. There was little noise at first, only the sigh of wind in the rigging, the occasional boom of a distant cannon softened by air and distance, and the calls of captains carried across the waves. The ships passed one another like dancers, never too close, always aware. Smoke rose in slow spirals where shots had been exchanged. On deck, men stood quietly at their posts, watching sails emerge from the fog, adjusting lines, waiting for signals. The sea between them was wide enough to hold hesitation, yet narrow enough to carry intent. These were not battles of thunder and fury, but of movement and patience, of long hours under a drifting sky, of silence broken only by commands and the low groan of hulls turning through the water. It was near Gravelines, along the coast of France, that the encounter deepened. The sea was choppier now, stirred by uncertain weather and the rising energy of opposing fleets. The Armada had anchored near shore, the ships close together, their anchors dropped in careful rows. The crews rested in brief comfort, their sails trimmed, their cannons aligned. Then, in the still hours before dawn, dark shapes began to drift toward them. The English had released fire ships, vessels set alight and pushed gently by the tide. Their hulls burned slowly, crackling as they moved, casting flickering light across the water. The Spanish sailors woke to an eerie glow and the smell of smoke. Bells rang on decks. Orders were given, anchors raised. Panic did not spread like wildfire. It crept instead, quiet and urgent. Ships began to scatter, breaking formation to avoid the drifting flames. In the confusion, the Armada lost its rigid shape. And in that moment of vulnerability, the English moved closer. Cannons boomed in the mist, their echoes muffled by distance. The battle at Gravelines unfolded in fragmented encounters. Spanish galleons fired with steady resolve, their decks braced against the roll of waves. English ships darted in and out, releasing volleys before retreating to reload. Smoke thickened in the air. Sails tore gently in the wind. Water splashed against hulls. And yet, even amid this movement, a strange calm endured. The sea did not rage. The sky, though heavy with cloud, held back its storms. The dance continued for hours, until the wind changed direction and the Armada, scattered and weathered, began to drift northward, away from the coast. As the Spanish ships turned from the coast, a hush fell over the water. The sounds of battle faded into memory. Sails were reset. Wounded tended. The fleet, though dispersed, began to reassemble, its captains searching for signals, for familiar outlines against the shifting sea. The English ships followed at a respectful distance, cautious of weather and wear. The Armada, no longer seeking confrontation, looked to the northern waters for escape. Above, clouds thickened, and the wind spoke of change. The sea, once a broad stage, became narrower with each passing hour. For many aboard the Spanish ships, the horizon became their anchor. They watched it quietly, seeking safety beyond the gray line where sky met sea. Some whispered prayers. Others simply worked, repairing sails, sharing rations, tending the long, patient business of survival. The fire ships, the shots, the smoky morning, these were behind them now. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also the promise of motion. The Armada had endured its first full encounter. And so the ships sailed on, disappearing into the mist that had always followed them, sails in the fog, shadows upon the sea. The Armada turned north, slipping into colder waters and darker skies. The warmth of southern seas was now behind them. Ahead lay the rugged coasts of Scotland and the long, bending outline of Ireland, lands cloaked in mist and softened by rolling cloud. The sea itself changed here. It breathed deeper. The waves grew taller, their edges brushed with white, their rhythm more assertive than before. The fleet, once so tightly gathered, now drifted in smaller groups. The grand formation that had begun in Spain had loosened, scattered by winds and battle. Still, the ships pressed forward. Their sails strained against shifting gusts. Their wooden frames groaned under the pressure of tides and storms that arrived with little warning. Days lengthened and then dimmed. Nights grew colder. Rain came in sheets, falling from skies so gray they seemed to blur the boundary between sea and air. Thunder rolled from beyond the horizon, and lightning revealed brief flashes of coastlines, cliffs, and islands that appeared and vanished like ghosts. On board, sailors worked in silence. Ropes were tightened. Buckets carried rainwater from flooded decks. Fires were doused and lanterns extinguished in the wind. Men huddled below decks, whispering prayers or closing their eyes to the rhythm of crashing waves. Above them, officers kept watch, their hands steady on damp wood, their faces lined with salt and rain. The Armada was no longer a fleet of ambition. It had become a fleet of endurance, each ship guided by instinct, by memory, and by the hope that somewhere ahead there would be calmer waters again. As the ships entered the North Sea, the wind shifted sharply. It came from the west, pressing them toward treacherous waters and unforgiving shores. The currents pulled at their hulls, steering them into narrow straits and rocky outcrops. Charts were consulted by lantern light, eyes scanning faded ink in search of safe passage. But the weather rarely waited for decisions. One by one, ships lost sight of each other. Some turned too far east, others too far west. The ocean spread between them like a fogged mirror. Messages could not be passed. Flags were hidden by rain. The Armada became a scattered memory, stretched thin across a coastline that offered little refuge. The Scottish coast was harsh and wild. Cliffs rose straight from the water, their edges slick with moss and sea spray. Inlets were few, and the rocky ground beneath the waves could shatter a keel with barely a sound. Ships that strayed too close found themselves at the mercy of both storm and stone. Wood splintered. Masts snapped. Sailors, unable to steer, clung to ropes and prayed. There were no great cries, no scenes of panic. Only the slow yielding of ship to sea and the soft hiss of waves pulling timbers under. Some vessels managed to turn and catch a kinder wind. Others disappeared, leaving only driftwood and silence behind. In the logs of survivors, those days were recorded in weather and water, long stretches of storm, broken only by the sight of land that could not be reached. Ireland's coast, green and sweeping, came into view for some of the fleeing ships. Its bays and cliffs rose like an invitation, softened by mist and shadowed by low hills. But the sea near Ireland held its own challenges: hidden rocks, strong tides, and beaches where rescue was uncertain. Several ships ran aground. They came in with the tide, battered and broken, their sails shredded and hulls leaking. Crews tumbled into the surf, some carried ashore by waves, others never reaching land. For those who survived, the shore was both blessing and uncertainty. Local villagers emerged from the hills, watching from a distance before approaching. Some offered help, blankets, food, a place to rest. Others, wary of strangers and the shifting politics of the time, responded with caution. A few survivors were captured, others sheltered in silence. The wind carried the names of the ships no longer afloat, and the beaches slowly gathered the evidence: planks, oars, and quiet remains. Among the survivors, stories began to take shape. Stories of drifting in fog, of standing at the helm through nights of wind, of moments spent staring at the sky while waves threatened to swallow the horizon. These tales were told with wonder, with the quiet awe of having seen the sea at its most commanding. In time, the survivors would return to Spain, fewer in number, changed by the journey. And the sea, as always, would smooth over their path, leaving only memories in the heather and the whisper of their passage carried in the wind. Long after the sails had vanished beyond the horizon, the sea remained unchanged. Waves continued to rise and fall. Tides moved in and out with the same quiet rhythm they had always known. Yet in the hearts of those who watched the Armada pass, and of those who waited for ships that never returned, something gentle and lasting had settled. The Spanish Armada, with all its scale and purpose, had become a part of the ocean's memory. The long days at sea, the starlit nights, the whispers of wind through rigging and the soft weight of fog on the water. In these moments, its story lingered, carried by the hush of mist and salt. Along England's coast, people spoke in low voices of the days the ships came near. Children remembered standing on the cliffs, watching the distant shapes shift and gleam in the morning light. Some saw lanterns floating at dusk. Others heard the low thrum of oars or the call of captains muffled by the wind. In their memories, the Armada was not a threat, but a shadow, an apparition that moved with grace and then was gone. In Spain, the tale became one of endurance. Those who returned spoke of storms more than conflict, of hunger and hope, of long silences broken only by prayer. They spoke with reverence for the sea, for their comrades, and for the long journey that had returned them home. Even today, the story can be heard in places touched by that passage. In small coastal villages of Ireland and Scotland, locals speak of shipwrecks buried beneath sand and seaweed. At low tide, pieces of timber sometimes emerge, weathered, softened by time, reminders of vessels that once crossed entire seas, only to rest here at the edge of the world. Legends grew around those wrecks. Some told of sailors who found refuge and chose to stay. Others spoke of treasures hidden in cliffs, of messages in bottles, of strange songs heard at night when the fog settled low and the air turned cool. These stories became part of the rhythm of life by the coast, half memory, half magic. And in the minds of mariners, the Armada lived on as a symbol of the sea's unpredictability. Charts and journals included its route as a record and a gentle warning. The ocean, they understood, followed no nation. Its loyalties belonged to the wind and moon, and those who traveled its paths did so with respect. Ships that passed the same waters in later years often slowed near known wreck sites, their crews pausing out of instinct, perhaps, or quiet recognition. Flowers were cast into the waves. A moment of silence was held. The sea, in turn, received these offerings without a sound, its surface unbroken, its memory ever deep. In England, the Armada's passing stirred more than national pride. It became a moment of reflection. Queen Elizabeth's speech at Tilbury, delivered with poise and strength, would be remembered, but so too would the broader sense of relief, the quiet return to normal rhythms, to market days and village bells, to ships returning to port unharmed. The victory was real, but understated. It was marked by gratitude. People offered prayers of thanks. Towns resumed their slow routines. Life moved forward in peace. The fear of invasion had faded, replaced by a sense of calm resolve. Elizabeth's England took careful note of the lessons offered. The strength of smaller, faster ships. The unpredictability of weather. The need for vigilance balanced with patience. The Armada had come and gone like a storm, powerful, vast, but ultimately passing. And in its wake, England held not only its sovereignty, but a deeper connection to the sea. For Spain, the loss was not disgrace, but experience. The sailors who returned were honored, their endurance praised. The story was of survival. And in time, the two nations would find new ways to navigate their place in the world, shaped by what they had seen and softened by what they remembered. The ocean, vast and steady, had taught its lesson. And so the Armada's story rests, in books and in the sea itself, in the hush of wind across the water, in the glint of sunlight on a distant wave, in the quiet remembrance of sails in the mist. The sea is still once more. The breeze that once filled tall sails now moves softly through grasses along the shore. The ships, the sailors, the distant echoes of cannon and wind they've all faded into the quiet hush of memory. And along the coast, the mist begins to return, curling gently across the dunes and drifting out over the waves. In this quiet, it's easy to imagine them again. The Armada, a great arc of ships, gliding across silver waters beneath a watchful moon. The rise and fall of sails in the distance. The low creak of timber as the tide lifts each hull. These moments remain in stillness, in the memory of a world shaped by wind, water, and the slow passage of time. The journey we've taken tonight was not a story of battle, but of presence, of how ships moved through fog and tide, of how lives were carried on waves, and of how two nations found themselves watching the same horizon, wondering what lay beyond. It was a journey through silence as much as action, through the soft, enduring rhythm of the ocean's breath. As we return now from those waters, let your thoughts settle like sand beneath the tide. Let the story dissolve into the hush of evening. There's no need to hold on to the names or the dates, the coastlines or the winds. They'll remain, quietly waiting, should you wish to return again. What matters most now is the stillness, the comfort of calm seas and distant sails, the way the past becomes soft at the edges, like mist touching the water. Let your eyes grow heavy. Let your breath slow. Let yourself drift. Thank you for joining me on tonight's journey. I hope it brought you a little peace, a little wonder, and a little closer to rest. Until next time, sweet dreams.